Winston the Red Engine was an engine that lived on the island of Sodor. He was a kind engine. He was also mixed traffic. He could pull trucks and coaches very easily. It's been some time since Edward the Blue Engine was taken out of service, so he could rest. He did feel lonely, but luckily Winston would stop quite often to tell him the news. One day, Winston was done with work and was coming to visit Edward as usual. But then he saw something that made him ground to a halt. He stopped right outside the sheds where he found the big engines laughing at Edward. He overheard them say,
"The driver won't choose you again. He wants big, strong engine like us."
Winston could tell what the big engines were saying hurt Edward deeply. 'Cause deep down, Edward knew they were right. He hadn't been out for a long time, and it began to make him sad. Winston was disgusted by this and left without saying anything. He went to Wellsworth Station where he found Sodor's oldest engines waiting for him. Winston told them everything that the big engines had done to Edward. They listened, and they were not pleased.
"I never liked those big engines. Always so arrogant and think they're so great. Look down on us smaller, older engines." "Agreed."
"But what should we do?" said Adam worriedly. They all thought until Eagle got a really good idea. "Yes, I could do that." He whispered to the others, "I'll do it tomorrow." The next day, Winston woke up unusually early and pulled up next to the shed. And before the usual driver and fireman could come and start working on the engines, Winston said, "Now, driver, now, fireman." Winston's crew started walking towards Edward. And dare I mention what they said? I think you could guess.
"What's the matter? Are you feeling sad? Would you like to come out today? And Edward said, "Oh yes, please." So the fireman lit the fire and made a nice lot of steam. Then the driver pulled the lever and Edward puffed away. The other engines were very cross at being left behind.
Winston grinned when he saw the expression of terror on the other engines' faces. But when the real driver and fireman came, he said that the other engines were bad. So the driver and fireman took him out too. "Peep, peep, look at me now," said Winston, smirking to the other engines. He didn't catch their expressions, but he knew that he felt them glaring at him. Thanks to Winston, Edward had the best day out ever. His pistons pumped and his boiler bubbled. Despite him not being out for a long time, he performed so well that the driver promised to take him out the next day. "I can't believe it!" shrieked 98462. "They let that bucket of bolts out today! How's that possible?" "I know," said a visiting engine. "I just got here, but I could tell he has very little power." "You could say that again," said 98462. "Since he first got here, he was nothing but a piece of scrap." Gordon, who was sitting there, despite him still having his pride, he knew right from wrong, and he knew that 98462 was nothing more than a rude engine. "Edward's design," started Gordon, "was okay in one point of time, but modernization came. But that doesn't make him any less of a useful engine than all of us, though his importance doesn't surpass me. After all, he's a little engine. I wouldn't expect him to help me in any type of way." At that point, 98462, 87546, and the visiting engine all poked up and started arguing back with Gordon. At that moment, Eagle pulled into the sheds. "I see we're talking about Edward," he smirked. "Well, speak of the devil, the driver said that he's taking him out tomorrow. What do you think of that, The bigger engines jumped. I was just saying," said Gordon. "I was just telling them that Edward is a useful fellow and he needs Oh, I see," said Eagle. "Well, I think it will be in your best interest to keep it that way," he said. The other engines didn't respond. They stayed quiet until night fell.
And he told the other engines in the shed that night, "I'm going out again tomorrow. What do you think of that, But he didn't hear what they thought, for he was so tired and happy that he fell asleep at once.
"Don't worry, little Edward. I'm going to pull the express tomorrow. Then I'll show you how important I am."